Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my April 2024 reading review. I've started doing this where I'll talk about all the books I read in the month, and then at the end, I'll talk about what I consider to be my book of the month. And in April, I read 11 books, which 11 books is pretty solid for me on the higher end than normal. I usually read about 8 to 11. Somewhere in there. During the summer months, I might have as high as 15. During some of the school year months, I might drop down to like 7 or 8, but usually it's in that 8 to 11 range. And I read 11 this month, which is a good number, but 4 of the books were tomes, which means they were more than 500 pages, and one of the books was like a few pages shy of being a tome. So it's basically 5 tomes that I read this month. So a decent amount of pages read. And I have one book that I would consider a 3-star book. I have 7 books that are like 4 stars out of 5. That's out of 5. Because when I write my physical reviews, I write out of 10, but like Goodreads will only let you do 3 out of 5. So I'm talking about out of 5. So I have 1 3-star review, 7 4-star reviews. Although some of the 4 stars are over here and some are way up here. Like there's a difference between the 4-star reviews. And then I have 3 5-star reviews. I read some great books this month. So let's start off with the weakest book. The only one book I was just like, okay, I read that. And that was Tales of Enlightenment by George Mann. This is a short story collection from the High Republic, from the Star Wars Insider, plus 1 original story. So it's 6 stories. The book, in its entirety, the book is only about 90-something, like 93 pages, 94 pages. But when you look at just the short stories, it's only about 60 pages. So it's really short. There's not a lot of story here. And it's at a price point of like $20. So it's at a pretty high price point. And I just don't think the value's there. I think the stories were interesting and added context. But the stories were not essential, and they were certainly not worth the price point of $20, I think. We've gotten other books that were maybe a little bit more, $30, but you got 40 short stories out of it, and this just had 6, and so I just didn't feel that worth it. And then this had some interviews at the end and a timeline for the High Republic books, but that doesn't matter. So I have enjoyed some of the High Republic books. This one's not it, sadly. I also, going into my 4-star books, I'll start from the weakest, work all the way to the best. So the first book I'll talk about is an older fantasy novel titled Oath of Gold. This is the 3rd book in the Deed of Paxenarian by Elizabeth Moon. I read the first book, really enjoyed it. Really, really enjoyed Sheep Farmer's Daughter. And then the second book, Divided Allegiance, didn't care for the book. I thought it was just okay. Like, didn't love it, didn't hate it. It was just, And then this book I thought was actually entertaining, but not as good as the first book. So this one's kind of in the middle of the two. I give this like I said I was going to talk about the 4. Anyway, this is a solid read, but not amazing. It was a solid read. Had some interesting ideas in the middle. This is a rare book that the middle was the strong point. The opening in the beginning, or the beginning and the ending was but the middle was amazing. And that is so rare for me to say about a book. Usually it's the beginning or the ending that hooks me. Speaking of which, moving on to my next book. It's a science fiction book, part of the Honor Harrington series, and that's In Enemy Hands. This book I thought was had a really weak opening and a super strong ending. This book, it's kind of ponderous at the beginning with the world building, but it really pays off stuff. If you're into military science fiction stories, if you like if you like military stories like Horatio Hornblower, this is the series for you. And this book has some Horatio Hornblower elements to it. But it's also just military science fiction. So if you like military and science fiction stuff, you'll probably enjoy this. But as I said, the second half of this book, amazing. First half of the book, not good. All right, my next 4 out of 5-star read was a Star Wars book titled Death Troopers. And this was one of the Star Wars Legends books I had not read yet. It's very short. It's only like 200 pages, so it reads really quickly. I was able to read it in a day. It's like 270 pages, and it's about Star Wars zombies. This prison ship is trying to refuel and resupply, and the resupply ship is full of zombies. And so the prisoners have to escape and try to survive and escape the zombies. And there is a classic Star Wars character who shows up in this, and that was a very interesting choice by the writer. And this is not a favorite book of mine, but it was an entertaining read, worth reading it once. Had fun with it. My next read that I read was Wraith Bound by Tim Akers. This is the first in his planned saga called the Spiritbinder Saga. This is from Bane Books. Several of the books have been from Bane. And this book's pretty hefty. It's like 600 plus pages. So this one is, I think, the longest book that I read this month. And Wraith Bound is basically a flintlock fantasy novel that is basically the rift between Earth and the underworld or hell is kind of splitting, and so creatures are getting through this rift and getting into Earth, and it's causing problems. And the main character, he binds himself to a wraith accidentally, and it causes problems, and he goes on a journey to try to stop all these problems from happening. And it's got some interesting ideas, and I actually really enjoyed the characters in this one, and I'll be curious to see if the series continues where it goes from here. And it has a gorgeous Jeff Brown cover. Gorgeous. Next, I read a classic science fiction novel that has been talked about for a while, and that is God, Emperor of Dune. I've heard some people be like, do not read it, it's so trippy. And some people that were like, oh my goodness, it's so amazing because of how trippy it is. And so it's like, I stopped reading the Dune, the Frank Herbert Dune books a couple years ago, and said I want to focus on the Brian Herbert ones. And I got some flack for that because I love Brian and Kevin's writing style, and I was not loving Dune Messiah, Children of Dune. But I decided to pick up God Emperor, and I really enjoyed this. I was really surprised after how much I didn't enjoy Children of Dune and Dune Messiah, that I would love this so much. I think that this is a solid 8 out of 10 read. I think it was really entertaining. There are certainly some things that I would change and fix in this book pertaining to the way it handles things. But the whole God Emperor, the idea of him being in the worm and the people trying to stop him and the idea that he keeps bringing back Duncan, Idaho, all of that stuff, I thought was great. And this book skips over turning Arrakis into a paradise. And I was like, hey, you missed the most important part. I was interested in that. But I really, really enjoyed this book. It's not my favorite. I still think the original Dune is the best. And I think some of the Kevin and Brian stuff is still really good. But this is up there for my number 2 spot of the original series. And I really enjoyed it. Next is a new release book that I read, which is actually this is a crowdfunded book, and this is Persephone by Kevin J. Anderson and Jeffrey Morris. I was just talking about Kevin. Jeffrey Morris wrote a movie script, and Kevin worked with Jeffrey to adapt it into a novel that they kickstarted. Was really successful. This is the fruit of their labor. It is a short 270-page book, but it is well worth it. It is a really excellent read. I really, really loved this book. And this scratches that hard science fiction itch. If Dune is dealing with the space opera side of science fiction, this is what dealing with the space exploration of it. But there's an element of space opera here that I really enjoyed. Next on my list is another new release. This is my last 4-star book out of 5. That is John Jackson Miller's The Living Force from Star Wars. This is a prequel-era book. This book is featuring the entire Jedi Council. They basically go on a retreat to this planet Quen to try to reorganize themselves, to reorient, to give purpose back to them. And basically some pirates and other ne'er-do-wells decide to attack them on that planet. And, of course, hijinks will ensue. And it's quite interesting because every member of the council is present in this book, and this is, to date, John Jackson Miller's funniest book that he's written. It's not his best. It is not his best. It's about in the middle for him, but it is a funny book, and I really enjoyed this one. So that's why I give it a 4 out of 5. All right, now we're getting to my top 3 of the month. These were all excellent, amazing reads. These are all 5 stars. The first one is the Star Trek novel I read this month, Titan, Taking Wing, the first of the Titan novels. This takes place immediately after Nemesis, dealing with the Romulan and Reman crisis. This has William Riker taking command of the Titan, which is just this group of this ship with an eclectic crew of all these different species. They have to build entire rooms in the ship just to certain species specifications. It's just so fascinating. And it sets up the rest of the series really well, and I loved it. And so that's the first book in that series. It was a 5-star read. Next, I have a fantasy novel titled Dragon's Bane by Barbara Hambly. Barbara, she just did an amazing job with this. So many people know her for Star Wars, and they don't like her for her Star Wars stuff. I haven't gotten to her Star Wars stuff yet. I read this because of Brandon Sanderson saying that this is the book that got him into reading fantasy, and I totally understand it. This is the kind of quest to go slay a dragon, basically, but from the perspective of a 37-year-old woman who's a mother of some children and is a witch. And it's just such a different take on the genre. And I would say this book did for The Hobbit what the Symphony of Ages by Elizabeth Haydn did for The Wheel of Time. I really loved it. And it's a really quick read. I was able to read it super fast. And it also just speeds by. And it has a really cool twist towards the end that I liked. But my book of the month has to go to the book by John Grisham titled The Appeal. It's one of his legal political thrillers. This is a book about a chemical company which dumps a bunch of chemicals in Mississippi. And the company is facing millions, if not billions of dollars in potential lawsuits and in damages and things that they'll have to pay. Not to mention the millions, if not billions of dollars they'll lose in the stock market. And so the head of this chemical company decides to finance a political run for a Supreme Court justice. And you may think, what? In the state of Mississippi, their Supreme Court is elected, or at least was at the time, elected, and so the people run for office. And so the goal is to get one of his cronies, one of his puppets, in to basically pull the strings and make sure that the Supreme Court rules in favor of the chemical company, and so that they will, instead of losing money, they will make money. And it is diabolical and just Machiavellian and just really fascinating. This is the type of John Grisham book that I just ate up. I read this book so fast. I read it in like a day. It's so worth it. It's such a good book. I love John Grisham's writing style, and I loved this book, and he's just rising up the ranks of my favorite authors of all time. And I have so many more John Grisham books I want to read, but I have other things to do. But I really loved this book, and this, of course, made my book of the month. It was totally worth it. This is the second month that my book of the month has been a different genre. Like, usually it's science fiction, fantasy, or tie-in fiction. That's usually what my book of the month would be every month, the best book I read. Last month, it was a historical fiction with Pillars of the Earth. This month, it's The Appeal. So, go figure. So those are the 11 books that I read in the month of April. A really solid month of reading. And I'm hoping that May and June are even better. Well, let's see what happens. But that is what I read. If you have read any of these books, let me know what you thought of them. Did you like them as much as me? Did you dislike them? Let me know those thoughts. Also, what did you read in April? And what do you plan to read in May? Let me know all those thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan. And thank you for watching.